friends.
Oh, the king of meat.
The king of meat.
He's
yeah.
called the king of meat.
That is kind of his marketing slogan.
He's in prison now.
He is in prison now, yes.
Very recently.
The king of meat is in jail. Wow.
A 3 días desde Mendoza, en rumbo a Santa Fe. A brief message for our Spanish-speaking listeners. Hola, mis oyentes favorites. En este quinto episodio entrevistamos a una desarrolladora que no habla castellano. Les ofrecemos nuestras sinceras disculpas y les esperamos con los brazos abiertos para nuestro retorno hispanohablante en el episodio 6. Acercándose a mí. In this episode, we talk about matajuegos, Game Workers Unite Argentina, Bitsy Games, Narrative Games, the Riot Games Walkout, Pathologic 2, Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, Twine Games, horror games in general, Argentina's King of Meat, and how food is gross. No vengas a por mi alma antes del fin. Welcome everybody to the first English language episode of En busca de Porko, a podcast where we celebrate and analyze the work of Porko, an Argentine indie game developer who made a bunch of weird games in the early 2000s. My name is David Marchand.
And I am Pablo Cuarta.
And today we're here with a very special guest who is called...
Laura Michet.
Hi Laura, thank you for being here with us. Could you maybe tell us a bit about yourself for the members of our audience who maybe aren't that familiar with your work?
Yeah, I'm a game developer. I started off making strange things, mostly for browser, mostly using Twine. And I had a lot of very odd corporate jobs, ranging from quest writing and quest design for browser games to market research and business development type stuff. And then I did a bunch of commercial indie games work on Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, which was a pretty big game about early 20th century American culture. And then I also worked on Frog Fractions 2. And now I work during the day at Riot Games that makes League of Legends. And I still do contract indie game writing and editing in my spare time.
So we usually start these episodes by talking about what we've done in our lives and our game making lives, most of all, since the last time we recorded. But since this is our first English language episode, we might want to start by introducing ourselves and talking about more about the premise and what we usually do as a group. So Pablo and I, and also Rumpel, who's not here with us today, are 3 of the founding members of Matajuegos. And Matajuegos is a kind of Argentine-based, Latin American-focused
video game criticism blog,
where we sometimes write our own articles, mostly in Spanish, sometimes in Spanish and English, and sometimes we choose originally English articles and translate them into Spanish when we want them to be available for a wider audience.
Yeah, we tend to concentrate a lot on material that looks at video games from a social lens, from an artistic lens, and from a political one. We also do a lot of work on games that feel personal, about either developers' relationships to their own games or about players' relationships to games they play, and that focus on games as a medium of expression, of self-expression.
And we also make videos and this podcast.
That's true. We do make this podcast sometimes.
Yes, and we wanted to try, since most of our endeavors are aimed at both English-speaking and Spanish-speaking audience, we wanted our podcast to have some English-speaking and some Spanish-speaking episodes. But we started off with 4 episodes in Spanish.
Yeah, but I think doing them in English is a great excuse to talk to interesting people we like who speak English, like Laura.
Hello.
So instead of talking about what I did since we last recorded, which was 2 weeks ago?
It was 2 weeks ago now.
The other things I've done in 2019 were releasing a few Bitsy games and a few other small games and coordinating the Argentine chapter of Game Workers Unite with Pablo.
That's true. I am involved in that. Hi there, English-speaking audience. My name is Pablo Cuarta. I'm a narrative designer and writer. I've worked on a few games now. I'm also one of the co-founders and editors at Matajuegos, which is the blog we mentioned earlier that makes this podcast. I am one of the coordinators of GWU Argentina. And what have I done this year? I went to GDC. We had fun times hanging out with Laura.
Yeah.
True.
I've been directing a lot of voice actors in this last month for the console versions of Element Space, which will have voices, which the original PC release did not. And what have I done? I just got a tattoo. I just got a tattoo about a couple of hours ago. And I don't think I've done anything of...
You made a Bitsy game?
I did make, I guess, yeah. I made part of a Bitsy game, yeah.
Were you folks doing the Bitsy jams?
I haven't been doing Bitsy jams. Rumpel does a lot of Bitsy jams, and I know David has done a couple. But I did do the Global Game Jam, for which we did make a Bitsy game.
Awesome.
About houses. My home has a panther and a burning door, and not much else.
I mean, if you've got to have something in your house, you might as well have a panther in it.
So I originally just wanted to start to just make a window panel door, like a big door, like I've seen in some homes. And just getting the perspective of that right in Bitsy led to a process of me overly perfecting this door until that's basically all I did. And it kind of kept going off in weird tangents where I'd get the perspective right, and then I would draw flames around it and animate the flames. Somehow that led to a panther inhabiting the room, and the panther wants nothing to do with you. The panther wants you to leave the house. So that's all you can really do. You can come in, you can talk to the panther, and then you're kind of forced to leave. And in these past couple of weeks, aside from that voice acting, that voice directing I've been doing, I've been looking at maybe going to Narrowscope 2019.
Oh, yeah.
Next month, because I have to be around the New York area, and Boston is not so far off.
Yeah, it's quite close.
I just had to be there on that weekend, so I was thinking of maybe stopping by and volunteering.
Oh, I used to live in that area. It's very easy to get to Boston from New York. However, I wanted to go to Narrowscope, but I just don't have time. It's too far away from me now.
Right, you're out in LA.
Yeah. It's a whole day of travel just to get out there.
For those who don't know, Narrowscope is a 3-day convention out in Boston. I think it's hosted at MIT that focuses entirely on narrative in games and on interactive fiction and writing and narrative design.
Yeah.
So it's their first year producing the convention, so it seems exciting. And I know a lot of the people who are presenting talks are people I know, or who at least I've run into at GDC a few times. Like Emily Short, Kat Manning, and a few other people.
Yeah.
So if that ends up working out, that'll be exciting. Laura, what are you up to? What have you been up to lately?
I've been working days at Riot and weekends and evenings on side projects. And the most recent one I spent a lot of time on was Pathologic 2, which came out last week. So I've been spending the last week just looking at the hashtag on Twitter and playing the game myself for the first time. Searching Tumblr for fan art, I suppose. I don't know. It's been pretty entertaining to see people react to it.
What kind of fan art have you found?
There's a lot of very horny fan art about the main character of Pathologic 2. So the original Pathologic has 3 main characters, but Pathologic 2 right now currently has only one of the original single-player campaigns. Pathologic 2 is more like Evil Dead 2. You know, it's like a remake of the first Pathologic game, not really a sequel. They took one of the main player characters from the original game and they gave him a much more detailed, involved, and I think a much better personal story. And anyway, all the fan art is about this character making out with one of the other main characters, the Bachelor, who doesn't have a campaign in this game yet. Just, yeah, and endless amounts of Artemy and the Bachelor making out.
I need to look this up. How's the game? What's the game like?
It's a pretty idiosyncratic horror game, I guess. It's a survival horror game where you play a doctor who's trying to help to stop a plague outbreak in a town on the Russian steppe. You have a couple things you can do to cure people, diagnose their illnesses, you can do surgery on them, you can give them medicine and stuff like that. But the disease is not really a normal infection. There's sort of a spiritual element to it as well. The town has been infected because of things that happened to the people there and choices that they made. And there's some suggestion that the town itself might be the source of the disease, and the way that it was built and the way that it interacts with the steppe and the earth around it. And you spend a lot of time running around the town on a very tight schedule. There's 12 days in the game, and if you don't complete quests one day, then they usually disappear. And the people who were counting on you are now worse off the next day. So you run around on a very tight schedule, trying to solve people's problems, but also the entire time all of your status bars are dropping rapidly. So you're becoming thirsty and hungry and exhausted, and you're getting more and more infected. Your immune system is dropping and stuff like that. You spend an awful lot of time trading needles and fish hooks to children in exchange for dry loaves of bread. It's pretty wild.
As you do.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah,
just in general.
It's a psychologically exhausting horror game, but it's very, very good, in my opinion.
I know at least Kevin Snow, who I know also worked on the game, was a big fan of the first one.
Yeah, there were 4 of us English-speaking writers who worked on the English localization. Bruno Diaz, Kevin Snow, Kat Manning, and I all worked on it. And we didn't we didn't do so much original writing for it, but we did polish and improve the English script.
What was the original language of the game?
It's originally in Russian. They did have a translator who did a I think very good, first English script for the game, and then we worked with her to improve it. Her name is Alfina.
What was it like working on that? I mean, I know you've worked with those 3 writers before, so I imagine you have a pretty solid work relationship, or at least work process pipeline. Yeah,
we're good friends. We worked on Where the Water Tastes Like Wine together. I edited Where the Water Tastes Like Wine and wrote a bunch of content, but I was not the sort of editor of the group this time. Kevin Moore had that role this time. Yeah, we already had worked together, so it was pretty easy to do it again. It was different, though, because last time I was working directly with Janneman to make sure that the content was up to standard and was what Janneman wanted. But this time, there was a whole chain of people we were talking to get through to Ice Pick Lodge, so I did not actually talk directly to the main developers of Pathologic 2 at all. I talked to Kevin, and Kevin talked to Alfina, who was the translator who spoke to us in English. And Alfina sort of gave us instructions from the Ice Pick Lodge team. So it was a very, very different experience. I'm not saying it was a worse experience, but it was definitely the language considerations forced us to work differently and to relate differently to the text.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. It seems from everything I've heard that the work's been very good. At least, I mean, that the writing is very solid. The English localization is. I haven't had a chance to play it myself, but I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've seen people praising it, which makes me very happy because we worked super hard on it. The original story itself is phenomenal, so it was merely a matter of making it so that people can like fully enjoy it. The story already was good before we got our hands on it, so we're lucky to have the opportunity to work on something already so deserving of everyone's attention.
I'm so envious.
I don't know how many more chances in my life I'm gonna get to work on something where somebody else already did all the hard lifting and I just get to polish it up and make it look good. So it's a good position to be in.
Well, it seems like you did something very similar in as far as polishing and making look good for Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, editing could be described as that process in any context. A lot of people think that editing is about correcting errors or fixing mistakes, but it's really just more about generally improving the quality of prose via feedback, right? Or text via feedback, right? Because it's not all prose in games. There's VO as well. My job at Riot is I'm an editor. I do a very small amount of writing for them, but I mostly do editing there. I found that different industries have different expectations about what you should do as an editor, and I was very glad that on Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, Janneman's goals for the project were that there were close to like 30 writers who had participated by the end of the project, right? 16 character writers and then a bunch more vignette writers who wrote the little events that were scattered across the map of America that you could encounter. And Janneman knew that he couldn't make a game about all these different people in America in the early 20th century with only one writer's voice. So he hired so many writers and then told them to lean into their own voices and tell the kind of story that they wanted to tell. So the whole time I was not really supposed to, change or normalize the voices of these characters or the voices of the writers doing the vignettes. I was supposed to help it feel more like a collection of short stories or a collection of different contributions by different people. And when I'm editing something for work, I make a lot more changes, and I usually try to make it fit house style a lot more. But for this, and also for Pathologic 2 a little bit, there was sort of like a standard that was out of my control, right? For Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, I wasn't trying to make everything sound the same. I was trying to help writers sound more like themselves. And for Pathologic 2, I wasn't supposed to make it sound like me or sound like the story I would have told, but I was supposed to make the English come out and express the story that Ice Pick Lodge was trying to tell. So there's a little bit of a similarity there.
There's two things I kind of want to say, but I don't know how relevant they are. I mean, first of all, the work that you all did on Where the Water Tastes Like Wine is consistently impressive every time I look at it. just the breadth of voices, as you say, and the quality of the writing is astounding.
Yeah, everybody just brought a lot of energy and also, personal inventiveness to that. And I think we were lucky to be able to make something where everybody was able to do the thing that they were good at, to the greatest extent they could. And then we just all knitted it together rather than trying to make everybody speak the same way or use the same tone or talk about the same themes.
For those who don't know, Where the Water Tastes Like Wine is kind of a storytelling game set in the United States during the Dust Bowl era, where you encounter different situations while traveling across the country, different little story vignettes, and you encounter different people telling stories, and kind of collect stories and trade stories as you travel. Not only the writers, but the amount of voices really made that world come to life.
I always think about it as a sort of RPG where your growing equipment is always the stories you witness on your journey, and you can level them up. And you occasionally have campfires, which are like boss encounters, where you have to use that equipment to have a great experience. The first time I met you, Laura, in person was in GDC 2018.
Yeah.
And Where the Water Tastes Like Wine had just been released.
Yes.
I remember we were all very impressed by it, and we continue, at least Pablo and I, we continue to be inspired by the project.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was Janneman's idea. I just helped execute it, I suppose. Oh, yeah, I just wanted to mention the lead game developer in that project was Janneman Nordhagen, who lives here in the U.S. And he was the one who came up with the idea for making a narrative game that was just, like tons and tons and tons of writers each talking about different things.
But I think what's really inspiring is all the stories that Where the Water Tastes Like Wine tells about America and about American society in the United States, and how the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression era kind of reflect on its current times and the current era.
Yeah, there's a lot of resonances.
Definitely.
We could go back as far as you feel comfortable, Laura, with how you started making games or paving out the way.
Sure. When I graduated high school, I was really into free games online, which I would now think of as being like indie games, right? I was really into those web portals that would collect a lot of Flash games or small downloadable games in the same place. There was one called like addictinggames.com that I was on all the time. I was really into the browser-based PopCap games that they made before they made like Plants vs. Zombies and stuff like that. When I got into college, I started to be more aware of like the indie game scene as like a thing, right? I used to read like TIG Source, that online community about indie game developers. I used to read Rock Paper Shotgun. I started buying indie games on Steam when a couple of them first became available in like 2008. And I always thought, man, I'd love to make a small game. That would be great. And I did investigate, Inform and other like text-based tools that didn't require a lot of coding. But I was also very busy in college, and I didn't really have the time to learn how to code as well as, play the games I wanted to play and complete my coursework. So a friend of mine, Kent Sutherland, and I made a website where we did a small amount of games criticism back starting around, I think, late 2009 through 2011. We did a lot of writing for it. The site is still up, but it's full of very juvenile stuff that we wrote at the time, and a lot of it when I go back and read it now, it's like me complaining that not all games are exactly the perfect game I want them to be.
Of course.
Yeah, and now that I've made games, I can't even read it anymore. It makes me want to just cringe myself into space. But I was really into reading about indie games and stuff, and I remember going to my advisor my senior year and telling him that for my creative writing thesis, I wanted to write a collection of nonfiction essays about video games. And he told me that I would only be allowed to do that if I traveled around the country and interviewed people, which I really did not want to do, and I didn't really have the money to do that either. I was like, what are you talking about? So then I went to a different advisor in the creative writing department, and I tried to get him to sponsor a thesis that would be an Inform game. I said, I'll write a parser game I wanted to make, and you don't have to do anything. You just have to be my advisor. I know how to do this. And he said, well, I'd get in trouble if I, didn't advise you correctly on your thesis. If I was just advising on something that I didn't understand, everyone would be able to tell. So no, you can't do that. And I got even angrier. And I ended up just writing an entire novel for my thesis, which was probably better because it didn't require me to learn to code or learn any new skill that I didn't already have, And it also taught me that, I can make large projects all on my own. If I want to, I can spend a whole year working on something and I can finish it, which is, a very valuable knowledge to have about yourself if you want to make video games. And so then I went back home to live with my parents after college, and I was unemployed for a while. And I forgot to mention, when I was in college, I did an internship for a Japanese-owned free-to-play games company out here in Los Angeles that was going under while I worked for it. I learned almost nothing. I was like a marketing intern, but we did very little marketing because the whole company was sort of imploding while I was there.
Oh.
Yeah, the person who hired me as their intern actually got laid off while I was there, and I got passed to a different person who said, I don't really need your help. Everything is on fire here. And he just showed me all of these spreadsheets he used to use when he was writing quests for MMOs at his previous job. So I learned how to, write MMO quests basically just by reading all his old documentation and doing nothing at work. And then anyway, when I graduated, I was unemployed for a while. And then the same guy who had been my second boss at this internship heard that I was unemployed. And he said, will you move out to California and write quests for Facebook games for me? And I said, absolutely. And he said, okay, get out here. And I was making very, very little money writing sort of seasonal content for Farmville ripoffs. Do you remember all those Zynga games where you would have a farm or you would have a homestead and you would have to water the crops and harvest them and stuff like that?
I've never played them, but they were big stuff.
For about 6 months, my job was writing item descriptions for the Christmas plants that you could get during Christmas for a game similar to that, right? And I really did not enjoy those games. I didn't like them at all. But we were working on a browser-based Facebook game, that was going to be more exciting and more similar to games and genres that I liked, and so I was very excited for it, but nothing ever came of it. Almost every project I worked on there was canceled. And the place where I was working for Tencent, which is a pretty big games publisher now, but this was back when they were still trying to develop games in the United States in a Tencent office. All my games got canceled, and they ended up turning me into a market researcher and then a business development support person, and then I did localization, and I did all sorts of strange things. About every 6 months, my job changed, and it was actually pretty valuable because I learned a lot about how corporate games industry works, and it's been valuable knowledge to have because if I see wacky things happening around me now, I can compare them to all the wacky things that I've seen in the past and projects I've seen blow up, and to the company that I was at when I was in my internship that sort of shut down around me. I think it's always good for young people to have experience watching a company blow up so that they can avoid it when they get older, maybe. But and in the middle of all of this, I was learning a lot about indie game development. I was making a lot of my own games in my spare time. I started using Twine a lot. David, I think around in 2012 was when I started following you on Twitter.
2012 was when I released my first Twine game, so it makes sense.
Yeah. We were both releasing Twine games around the same time. I released Swan Hill around the same time as you released a lot of your early stuff.
That's true. It was about the time that Twine blew up, and
yes,
it was such an open tool that I also translated to Spanish some works by people I knew, and I started talking with people I admired, and I remember that I probably came across Swan Hill on freeindiegame.es.
Yes, I used to check in that site. I used to check that site every single day back in 2012.
Yes, it was great.
It was wonderful. I wish there was an analog site today. For I guess for listeners who didn't know about it, it was just a website that I think almost every single day would post a free indie game, and they would have no commentary about it whatsoever. The only description, there would be a link to the game, and the only description would be something that the developer had said about their own game, like on the download page. It was brilliant. It was run by a group of people. I think Terry Cavanaugh was involved. I'm not sure.
Terry Cavanaugh was the first founder.
Yes, and they had, I think, around maybe 5 or so people who were posting things, and yeah, it was such an important part of the whole Twine boom, I think, because a lot of the games they posted were Twine games, and they were posting games from different sort of, I would say, Twine communities,
Yes.
And it was where I got a lot of the ideas for things I wanted to do in Twine, and it made me excited to make things in Twine because it knew that I could have an audience maybe of other people who would want to play it.
It was a beautiful site, yeah.
Yeah. I wish I had time to make a clone of it today.
I think the closest thing I follow today is Warp Door.
Yes, I think Warp Door was deliberately trying to be similar to it.
So, 2012?
Oh yeah, I was working in the day for Tencent, and at night I would go home and I was working on a Twine game. The Twine game is called Swan Hill, and it's the first Twine game that I released, and it's still the only one that I'm very proud of. But it's a very short, maybe 15 minutes or less experience. It takes place in a fantasy world where some people have magic powers, and in order to use their magic, they experience pain in their body. There's different types of people who have magic powers, and some of them are valued by society, and they're called philosophers, and other people in this society are not valued when they use magic, and they're referred to as witches. And the main character is a university professor who teaches magic, and he goes home to visit his family and has some negative interactions with his brother, who's older than him and owns a castle. It takes place in a fantasy world, but there's very little magic that happens in it. They just mostly talk to each other. And the big thing that I did in this game that I hadn't seen anybody else do before, that after that I saw other people doing it, so I don't know if I was really the first person to do it, but I was definitely one of the first people to do it, was I made it so that different types of links appeared on the page in different colors. There are 2 link types which have different effects on the story. There's red links commit the current state of the story on the page and move ahead, and black links change the text on the page. And sometimes you can reverse black links, so you might go back and forth between 2 options by clicking on black links, and then commit your choice sort of by clicking the red link. Other times the black links are just there to create a sense of rhythm or to involve the player in the experience of reading in a more interesting way. And at the time I was obsessed with like text UX, with the experience of clicking on text and hypertext, and how links that look or behave or move differently can make you think differently about the types of choices that you're making. And this was just sort of my focus on this, was how can I use these black links to create a rhythm in the player interaction that sort of mirrors what's going on in the story, or that mirrors the emotions in that scene of the story.
It was very clever. I remember at that point we were on an early stage of Twine or hypertext experimentation. It was unsettling not knowing what a link would do.
Yes.
If you clicked on a link on a Twine.
It bothers completionists, right? Because I always wanted to see the whole story, but I never knew if a link that I clicked on would take me to some other part of the story. A lot of people making these games were not thinking very closely about the player experience, or about user experience, I guess, of playing the story, or about even the narrative design of the story. They were just creating sort of like almost just tone experiences, in Twine, or they were just exploring whatever felt right to them at the time, which is a great way to work, particularly in a nascent creative community. But it meant that a lot of the games I was playing frustrated me a lot, because it didn't seem as though the creator had thought very closely about what my experience was like playing the game. That they had maybe thought a lot about what they were saying about their side of the story, but that I didn't really have a way of making sure that I understood how to play the game, or making sure that I understood what was even going on. And I was always terrified that I would miss something, or that I would miss the point of the story, or that I would miss the most interesting part, because I didn't know what the links would do. And this was definitely something that motivated me when I was making Swan Hill. I spent about 3 months working on Swan Hill, 3 or 3.5 months, and then I released it on my website, and I think I tweeted about it, and I think that's it. I don't think I did anything else. And then I ended up on freeindiegame.es, and also I was on a Rock Paper Shotgun roundup, and I thought I had made it finally. People were playing my hypertext game. After and before that, I worked on a lot of other hypertext games that I've still never released. I've actually, some of them I released in uncompleted form on my itch page. Yeah, technically my first hypertext game that I released was one for Molly Jam, called The Cursed Sword of Shaganuthor. And then for a jam called the Bring Out Your Dead jam that Emily Short ran maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I posted a couple games I had worked on around the same time as Swan Hill that I never finished. There was a game called Under the Village, which was just another narrative game where you're an amphibious fish person who lives in a village with other fish people. And then I was trying to make a top-down grid-based tactics narrative game where you were an alien hunting an animal on a strange planet called The Hunt, which I spent forever, like I taught myself JavaScript so that I could have these generated maps, and every time you would play this game, the session would generate like a new map and save it, and you could walk around and make changes to the different tile states, and I had all these JavaScript objects tracking, all these different tiles, and you can play that on my itch as well, and it has all my shitty pixel art and stuff like that, but I never completed it. Around the same time, I also started working on 6 Months, which I worked on for almost 4 years. It's a sequel to Swan Hill. Yeah, after 6 months, I made a lot of strange indie games. Most of them are Twine games. I've done a lot of game jams that I did not use Twine. Like I've done some Alexa games in the past, and I've made a bunch of Bitsy games, but most of the games I've made are in Twine, and some of them are not really. I don't know if I would even really call them games. At the time I was very adamant that they were not games, that they were more like a interactive short story. And I released one called The Hive Abroad that was like that, and one called The Brigand's Story, which is a interactive horror thing. And I wrote a sci-fi story called Redundant you cannot change the story at all. You just click through and you read all these different things, and the interactive experience is all about relating them to one another in an interesting way, and less about you making choices. But eventually, through all that, I got into making Twitter bots, and I made a Twitter bot that was actually what got me the Where the Water Tastes Like Wine gig. Yanaman was reading my Twitter bot, and that's why he hired me. With a friend of mine from college, Kenny Buklowski, and another friend of mine from college named Dan Smolinski also helped us make the original bot. We made a bot that generates menu items from a seafood restaurant somewhere in Massachusetts, and it includes a lot of local flavor, I guess. And then Kenny and I started writing hand-authored story tweets from that account. And for about 6 months in, I think, 2015, we were writing like 200 story tweets for this bot every week and scheduling them late at night so that they would go out and, tell this story about the restaurant. The restaurant was called the Slug in Hand Tavern, and it was in a small town that was taken over by a fish cult, sort of like from a H.P. Lovecraft story. All these people began worshiping fishes. The main character is a busboy from the restaurant and a couple of his friends, including, at one point, a fish monster who joins their team, and they fight against the fish cultists, and then we ended on a cliffhanger, and just because we burned ourselves out, it was so much work.
Well, and we're going back to fish monsters on the next segment when we're talking about the Porko game.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely one of those in there. Yeah, I've written a lot of stories about fish monsters for whatever reason. And I remember I went to a TwitchCon. I went to like the first TwitchCon in San Francisco. Like my work just sent me there alone and like didn't really give me any instructions of what I was supposed to do. So I just wandered around and like took a bunch of notes and sent some info back to them. And then at night I would go to just random indie developer parties because there were a couple that were happening at the same time. And I went to the Game Nest party where I met Yanaman. And then I think it turned out that Yanaman had read my Twitter bot or something like that. And then eventually he hired me to write some map stuff for Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, and then he hired me to do the editing. And around the same time, I had also done a game jam game that Jim Crawford ended up putting into Frog Fractions 2. Around 2017 and 2018, then all these indie games I had worked on started coming out. That's sort of the history of my indie games participation. After that, people started reaching out to me because of Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, and I haven't done so much personal projects since then because all my free time is based, on working on stuff like Where the Water Tastes Like Wine or Pathologic.
That is a lot of stuff you've done, and a lot of it very cool.
Oh, thank you.
Let's talk about Tango.
Yeah,
Yes.
I helped to localize a game about Tango that you two told me about, and then I didn't hear anything for a while, and then I suddenly learned it had received a narrative honorable mention in the IGF because you told me. Yeah.
Yes. Tango is a little, it's an adventure game based around the life of Carlos Gardel.
Carlos Gardel, the famous Argentine tango singer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I worked on it very quickly just to change a bunch of the jokes and stuff. They asked me to mostly focus on the humor, and then I didn't hear anything about it for a while, and then I suddenly learned it had received some recognition. It was a fun, quick job, and I learned a lot about Tango and about Carlos Gardel.
When did you start working on Riot?
In 2018, I finished orientation for Riot the week before GDC, and then I immediately went to GDC my very first week. I took time off before I had even worked there, almost. And I went to GDC and then went back and started at Riot. I don't know, I've done editing there. I've done a very small amount of writing. I wrote a short story that appeared on their lore website. I edited the story and the voiceover for the most recent League of Legends champion, which is Yumi, a very cute cat. Who I approve of very much. I love that I can now be a cute animal in League of Legends. I have been working at Riot almost exactly as long as it has been a totally out of control wild place to work, just because of like all the press coverage. I mean, my actual job is very normal, but I know we've been in the press a lot over the last year. Not so long after I started working there, we started to be in the press a lot, so that was interesting. But I really have enjoyed working there. I really like my coworkers, and I feel lucky that I'm, particularly in America, able to work in a place that has such nice health insurance associated with it.
That's good to hear.
It's a little bit dystopian, but yeah, that's definitely a big plus of being able to work at Riot. That and the pretty big audience. You know, it's exciting that you get to work on things that millions of people will see, and it's also a little scary.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying.
Laura, you briefly mentioned the press coverage Riot has been getting. Do you want to say anything about that?
I mean, sure. I did participate in the walkout a couple weeks ago. It's a very U.S. labor law specific thing compared to stuff that your audience probably knows about. But there's a concept in the U.S. called a contract with forced arbitration in it, which is about whether or not you're able to go directly to court if you want to sue your employer. If you want to sue your employer, but you have signed a forced arbitration contract, you will be forced to go into arbitration with them first. And this is, fine for some things. Many people don't want to sue their employer, in public. If you sue somebody, then the lawsuit is searchable on the internet. It's public information. But some people do want to sue their employer, and if they want to sue their employer, for example, for like inappropriate treatment in the workplace based on, sex or other ways they could be discriminated against, in those circumstances, they should not be forced into arbitration. Several large tech companies in the US have already walked back their forced arbitration agreements. For example, Google removed the requirement for sexual harassment cases to go to arbitration. And part of the reason why this is of concern is because if you bring all sex harassment cases through arbitration, then it's possible for a company to, for example, hide knowledge about these things. Somebody in my workplace could go into arbitration over sexual harassment with my employer. This is hypothetical. I'm not saying this happened at Riot, but hypothetically, someone could go into arbitration and I wouldn't know about it. It wouldn't, be news. I wouldn't be aware if there was like a dangerous person in my workplace, right? But a lawsuit forces everything to be public, which I think is good sometimes. So yeah, I participated in the walkout, and who knows what will happen next, but a lot of people participated, and I'm glad that we're having a conversation about it.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It was big news here also.
Yeah.
And I think we've done a pretty thorough account of your history. So is this a good moment for a break?
I think this is a good moment for a break, for all of us to get a break, and when we come back,
we will talk about a Porko game called Midnight Snack.
Great.
No vengas a por mi alma antes del fin.
Are horror games too scary for your poor old heart? Do you want to explore the creepy abandoned mansion without having to worry too much about the flesh-eating ghost witch? Check out the Descarifying Skinificator. Running any horror game through the Descarifying Skinificator will replace its most terrifying features with new, non-threatening assets. Getting chased by zombie werewolves? Their faces are now your emoji of choice. Unsettling sustained single violin note? Activate Yakety Sax mode. And Busca de Porko is sponsored by the Descarifying Skinificator. Clean underwear guaranteed, or your money back.
Welcome back, everybody, to our second and final segment of En Busca de Porko, where we are going to be speaking in more depth about this game called Midnight Snack, and about Porko in general, because on the first episode we did a lot of the introductory work that we might have to repeat now that we are starting to record in English.
Yes, so Porko was an Argentine independent developer who was active at the beginning between 2001, 2002, and 2010, I guess.
I think 10 is too late. 5 at the most.
Really? I kept seeing games by him later than that. But,
Yeah, it might be.
But maybe it's just that's when they were discovered. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I know I certainly discovered Porko a lot later on when I was reading. I found his live journal where he was doing a lot of commentary about the games he was making and just about general game design principles that he was commenting on. One of the ones I found particularly relevant was the one for Chancho Quest, where he talks about hyperlinks early on, even before Twine was a thing.
Yeah, and I never heard about his live journal, but I remember being very interested when I found his work in reading all the TXTs, all the README files that he uploaded along with his games. He always made a point of telling you about some of the credits and controls for the games, but then he went on these tangents about his life as a teenager. He was in high school when he made most of his games. About his life and his frustrations and about what it is making games and his creative process. There's a Mortal Kombat-like game he made, and the TXT describes in detail how he produced all of the assets and sprites for it by recording himself and his friend. So it's always kind of a huge trip reading these very long README texts.
What's the longest README text you've seen in a Porko game?
I think the Mortal Kombat one, the Porko versus Dex, has a huge tangent about his, how do you call it, when you finish high school and you go on a trip with all your...
It's kind of graduation.
Yeah, sort of he's talking about his graduation trip and how he's a nerdy kid who wouldn't have accepted to go to the graduation trip naturally, but he went anyway and he had a good time, and how you have to go on new experiences and how it enriches your life. So that's a pretty long one. There's another one about just all of his frustrations about making games in Argentina, whether it will ever become a sustainable business model or even as a personal job. And it's kind of heartbreaking.
I wonder the same thing a lot of days.
Yes, because we never really answered those questions. And I know for a fact Porko doesn't make games anymore. He lives in England now and he works for a bank, but he was wondering whether he would make a living out of games at that time.
He found the answer. No, we better move to England and work at a bank.
He found the best possible answer.
Well, his answer anyway.
Yes, of course.
How did you discover him, David?
When I started making games, and this is just to recap some of the things I said in Spanish in our first episode, when I started getting interested in Flash indie games, like we were talking in the previous segment, 2008, around that time, I was very interested at first in LucasArts adventure games.
Yeah.
Before learning about indie Flash games.
Sure.
And that led me to caring a lot about Telltale games before The Walking Dead was a thing. I mean, when they were just making Sam & Max, Monkey Island, all these revival sort of adventure games.
Right.
This was before I had Facebook or Twitter. They had this column on their website with interesting links.
Sure.
That rotated. And they added new ones all the time. One time I found a game called Today I Die by Daniel Benmergui, which I didn't know back then, but he's from Argentina. I know him now. And I became very interested in knowing what other people were making games and small experimental games in Argentina. And I ran into the work of Porko, which sit in my head until long after we started Matajuegos. And I said, this is a fascinating part of our unknown history and we should talk about more about it.
Yeah, so it turns out as David started talking with me about Porko, that not only I knew about Porko and about his games from a different source, but that a lot of other game developers who are active today in the local scene had each in their own way been influenced or had heard or played some of Porko's games. The reason that we started the podcast was not only to get to know our local developers, but it was also to kind of uncover this current of influence that has been present all along.
Yes, and in researching for the podcast, we find new and surprising ways in which Porko influenced different people in and outside Argentina and Latin America. So I was very surprised during GDC 2019 when we were at the GitHub and itch.io party with Laura. And I described the whole idea of the podcast to her. And I sort of showed her a few games from Porko's site and she recognized some of them.
Yeah.
So I told her, you should be here with us talking. Let us arrange that. So I was also interested in how did you know his work, or at least Midnight Snack?
I'm not sure, but it was probably in the early days of when I was becoming interested in indie games as well, when I was learning that game jams existed, and I was looking at basically student games online and trying to imagine what kind of game I myself would make if I could. I probably found Midnight Snack on a jam website that he made it for. I forget which one.
And what did you think? What did you think when you stumbled across Midnight Snack?
I was really impressed by the pixel art. You know, the monsters look pretty good for a 72-hour game jam. The sprites are pretty incredible. I've never made something that looks this good for a game jam. And I think I was also impressed by the deliberate pacing of the game.
Yeah.
The very slow, inexorable pace of the game, where you're like you're hunting these people through the streets as carefully as possible as these big creatures moving inch by inch, you know.
Yeah, so it is this very strange game in which you start out in the middle of this cloudy night. There's this incredible purple and white background illustrating this very cloudy night that hangs above this village. It's kind of a side-scrolling game in which you pick one of 3 characters, which each must feed on people.
Yes.
We have a vampire, a cannibalistic doctor, and a fishman from outer space.
Yeah, some kind of octopus, crab, fish type combo, man.
Yeah, it's strange because when they jump, all these extra legs that you didn't know the character had just kind of spring out.
Yeah, it's impressive.
And Laura was just mentioning, I think before we started recording, that each of the monsters is based on one of the game developers.
Yes.
So the cannibal doctor, I had never thought about this. So it was kind of a quick, very, very clever observation. But the cannibal is called Dr. Porkovich, which was always transparently about Porko.
And Dr. Porkovich also transforms into a werehog, this gigantic hulking pig monster at certain points in the game.
Yes. And outer fish, the kind of alien fish-like, water-like creature, is called similarly to the
Pixel fish.
To pixel fish, the artists. And there's Bloodbite, the vampire, which is inspired in Frostbite, the sound designer and music composer for the game.
And the EA game engine as well, Frostbite.
That's true. Responsible for all sorts of EA catastrophes.
Probably didn't exist back then.
No, definitely didn't.
Yeah.
Porko was at the forefront of all these things.
Yes,
even back
they
then.
should sue him.
But yeah, so each of these characters is kind of loosely named or loosely based after the members of Porko's development team.
Yeah, they probably express some essential truth about each of the creators. That's my guess.
Yes, I think Porko was definitely trying to talk about, the inner pig monster within all of us.
Or at least the inner pig monster he sensed within himself.
Yeah. And I think he does touch upon that in several other of his games, at least about the monstrosity or at least about the anger inside him. So it's definitely consistent, I think, with his other work.
I agree.
And so you kind of stalk this village at night. And
Midnight.
At midnight, exactly. It's a midnight snack. It's eternally midnight, always midnight in this village, always in the middle of the night. And you stalk the streets, encountering people, and you also walk into their homes and see what their lives are all about before you decide or not to devour them.
Yes, and there's I think the original demo that they made for the game jam where they met, you can't enter any of the houses.
No, you can only fight in the street. It's pretty bleak.
And then they made all the interiors. And it's strange to think maybe they would have preferred to make a more realistic date and night cycle, but given the constraints of the game jam.
You think so? I don't think so at all. I think the entire mood and the ambience of the game comes from this village that is eternally locked into midnight.
I think it's entirely possible that the entire mood of a game is born of a constraint.
No, definitely. Sure.
I think if they wanted there to be a day and night cycle, they would have called it a day-long snack.
Exactly. 24-hour snack.
Yeah, the never-ending snack.
Maybe at the beginning they wanted a day and night cycle, but I figure maybe that's the duality between the monsters. You were a person during the day and a monster at night, but I don't know. I feel like it's strange to ambient a horror game during the day.
Yes, it would be very tragic to be attacked by monsters who only eat at midnight their snack, but you're in a village where it's always midnight.
Well, it
very
makes sense for a
unfortunate.
monster who can only eat at midnight to move to a village where it's always midnight.
Yeah.
It's logistically very convenient for them.
Yes.
But I always found like the interior of the house is very interesting because they portray different vignettes of this kind of bizarre and kind of dark. I want to say day-to-day life, but it's always nighttime. They kind of have
Night
these
to night life.
Yeah, these villagers kind of have nocturnal lives where a lot of them are arranging or preparing food.
It's supposedly a horror game, and you start the game thinking the entirety of the horror is the main characters. So they are all very obvious monsters, and they are out to kill and eat people. But the fact that they are obvious monsters makes them less impressive, maybe less scary, and parts of what you learn or glimpse of the life of the people in the village is more unsettling.
Yeah, it's psychological horror as opposed to blood and guts horror, which is what we get in the street.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favorite house in the city?
There is a house where you come in and it's only children. Well, all the other houses, there's adults or at least there's families. This one, it's just 5 or 6 children around this huge table that is decked with food. There is kind of an implication when you speak with them or you interact with some of them that maybe what they're actually eating, the feast, is made of their parents or adults, but it's not very clear. It's kind of hinted at.
Yeah. A lot of the horror is quite vague in that way in this game.
That one always stuck out to me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that one quite well. I also liked the house where everybody was just cooking all the time, just cooking and cooking. And a higher and higher pile of food was growing in the middle of the house. But there's never any resolution to that. You never learn why they're cooking.
But some of the characters do throw food at you
Yeah,
as a sort of defensive mechanism.
it's possible that the food is going out into the street and becoming ammunition against you.
So it's kind of this village at siege, preparing where even the common people have to prepare food.
We've speculated that it's because the food is tainted, or that you can't eat it for some reason.
But you can eat the humans.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, presumably the humans eat this food. So if you eat the human, then you're also eating the food. But that's never resolved.
Right. But I mean, in that same sense, you could say a wolf eats grass because it feeds on herbivores.
Yeah.
But a wolf wouldn't be able to digest, or at least wouldn't get enough sustenance from eating plants.
Yeah, so outer fish can't eat a pie, but it can eat a pie that a human has digested.
Exactly. It's kind of this food chain thing going on.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
It's strange. And I guess for time constraint reasons, most of the monsters, 90% of the mechanics work the same, regardless of the character you choose. But technically, they're very different monsters. You have a human cannibal, a vampire, and an alien.
Mm-hmm. The thing that changes is that when you can go into kind of this free... When you eat someone,
Yes.
you kind of cut to the special animation in which each character kind of exemplifies the monster within them. The fishman becomes much more alien and large and fierce.
Yeah, it's some good sprite work.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're beautiful. If you go to the trailer, to the video trailer on YouTube for this podcast, I included some of the, I think, Outer Fish's feeding frenzy sprite, which is really good looking.
Yeah, and Dr. Prokovic turns into the werepig. And I don't remember exactly what the vampire does.
I think it's just a more scary vampire, or maybe it's more like a bat.
Maybe.
Like a huge bat. One of the rooms that stuck with me is this sort of aquarium, because Outer Fish does have a personalized line when he goes there. I'm assuming all of the monsters are him, because the game developers they're based on are men. And I remember that like Outer Fish went on a long speech about imprisoning these creatures that he identified with. But when I played it again before recording this, it was kind of a small throwaway line. And I was really disappointed. So maybe it was more of my preconception of Porko's work. And given that the first game we talked about on this podcast was about animals' rights, I would have assumed Outer Fish had more to say.
About fish.
Fish in captivity.
Yeah.
And I think he hints at that.
In the README, yeah.
Yes, because he's an alien. He doesn't...
Or maybe, the worst thing happened. An editor came in and cut the line.
I doubt it. I really doubt it. I'm much more confident that I'm misremembering it, because I don't think the game had too big a team.
Well, these VO budgets can do extraordinary things to the text. You think you have enough time and money to record a speech about the rights of fish, but then it comes down to the wire, and you don't.
You have to make some hard decisions then.
Yeah,
it's true. But it is kind of this unsettling scene in which you see outer fish faced with these captive fish who are going to be cooked. I mean, that's the idea.
Yes.
Those fish are there to be cooked and then to be devoured by the humans and to be produced into food. And the whole game just kind of all the different ambience kind of revolve around how gross and terrifying food really is, and just the idea of what we do to both plants and fruits and animals in order to devour them and eat them.
Yeah, we're taking these solid objects and we're chewing them up in our mouths, and we're turning them into mush.
Yeah.
And we're wrapping our bodies around them. It's kind of horrifying.
Yeah, we're digesting them with acid.
Yeah. We put a bird in our body and we dissolve it with acid. Imagine that. Imagine if it was free instead. I think that's part of what Porko is saying here.
And then our organism just discards what we don't want.
Yeah, and that's gross.
I mean, we could at least, honor it and keep everything, but no.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you mentioned ChanchoQuest, because ChanchoQuest does have that in the README, does talk about Porko's vegetarian phase.
At length,
in which, he wanted to do something from the perspective of the pig, so you could empathize with the pig and see that its suffering and at least the cruelty of keeping in captivity and slaughtering it. Maybe this is the opposite. This is kind of an opposite tactic of not empathizing with the pig, but kind of
de-empathizing with the human.
Yeah, just kind of grossing your own self out. Just
eater.
Yeah, just
embodying an alien intelligence, or an intelligence that yet human is still alien to our morality, like Dr. Porkovich.
Yes, and it's not that big of a stretch. I mean, a lot of vegetarian rhetoric goes to this idea of what if a different species considers humans to be edible.
Is that true? I've never heard that, but I believe you.
I can picture easily vegetarian people asking where you draw the line between animals you eat and don't eat. And that why wouldn't that include humans?
I have heard that rhetoric from extremists, for some more extreme or radicalized groups. Why don't you eat a dog if you eat a pig, etc. But I guess so.
I'm not sure if Porko's vegetarian phase was permanent or not. I think he mentions eating asado and meat on other readmes, but I never know which ones were written first and which ones were written later in life.
Right.
Yeah, it's something that has surprised me is that on Porko's site there's no published dates, so I'm unable to pin these experiences back to my own history, and it's difficult to unravel exactly when I saw them and what effect they had on me, because it's hard to remember when they happened.
Yes, you kind of have to download the games and maybe check when the files were created. That's unreliable. And I don't think Porko had any strong notion that people were going to be dissecting his work.
Yeah, the DLL file in Midnight Snack, the Game Jam version, was created in 2003. But the game was created in almost a whole year later in 2004. Yeah, it's unclear. And the website associated with that game jam is no longer active.
Porko's always mysterious.
Yeah, I've been thinking about horror games a lot lately because working on Pathologic 2.
Of course.
And it's always surprised me how completely dissimilar many horror games are from one another. A lot of people, when they say that they like horror games, they like the blood and guts, and other people, when they say they like horror games, they mean the atmospheric creeping around, and it's pretty cool that this game has both of those things.
Yeah, definitely. It is true that horror, unlike a lot of other game genres, isn't really defined by its mechanics, but more by its aesthetics.
Yes.
Which doesn't tend to be the case for most game genres, unlike movies or books.
Yeah, horror as a genre in games may be the closest thing we have to a typical genre. The way that movies and books do, an aesthetic genre or a tone or a content-focused genre.
My partner plays a ton of horror games, so I tend to watch a lot of them, but I don't tend to play a lot of them myself. I'm just trying to think of the last one I really dedicated myself to.
I'm not a big fan of horror games.
No?
I don't
Why
know
not?
many of them. I don't know. I just was never a fan of horror in movies. I guess I never developed the taste for it.
It's strange though, because if you think about interactive fiction and Twine games, there's a lot of stuff that veers into the horror genre in Twine.
That's true.
So I was gonna ask, because I've only seen screenshots of Pathologic. How does the plague affect people really?
It makes them generally ill. At one point in the game, people who are infected are completely sort of wrapped in bandages like mummies, and they pursue you very slowly through the houses while you're trying to loot these infected houses. The plague also causes these scabs to appear on the outside of houses, so you can tell from the street which ones are infected. It's pretty cool.
And it seems like something that might have been right in place in Midnight Snack had it come out later and had it had that vision.
Yeah,
it doesn't seem that far-fetched.
I would have liked to be able to tell the houses apart in Midnight Snack, so I could go back and I could find like the children's house and the food house.
Yeah, that is true. All the houses are indistinguishable one from the other. And I wonder if that was just a technical limitation or if it's some kind of commentary there.
Yeah.
You're playing as a stranger to the village. A stranger would maybe have a difficult time distinguishing between the houses.
I mean...
That's true.
Yeah, I think definitely Outerfish and the Vampire and Bloodbite are strangers, but I do wonder about Dr. Porkovich.
Oh, that's right.
If Dr. Porkovich was kind of the village doctor, and well, we know the village is a strange village, so it makes sense for this doctor to be a bit strange too.
But is it the kind of village that would ostracize a doctor for cannibalism?
I don't know if he's ostracized. It just seems like he's going to town. Ha!
I feel like he's on the run from society in general.
Yes, the TXT says now he is wanted for several cases of cannibalism.
I guess, but we don't see any law enforcement. We don't see any justice system.
Well, but if he's being chased by the law enforcement of other towns, he's a stranger to this village.
I see. Okay, maybe, yeah. Still, I think Dr. Porkovich he's the only one with a title. He's only the only one with a social relationship implicit in the name.
Yes.
That's true.
Doctors have to do with bodies just in the first place. Doctors manage bodies, they control bodies, they fix bodies, they determine which bodies are right and which ones are not. There is already a similarity between the doctor and the cook. The doctor as someone who acts upon bodies.
Yeah, in the same way that he takes his blade to a body, perhaps these townsfolk cook a dish.
Exactly.
Outerfish is sort of a scout for his home planet.
Yeah, so he came in, so it's strange because it says, he was looking for an aquatic planet, but then he saw people and, said, screw that, screw the water. I'm gonna have a snack.
At midnight.
At midnight, as it is, yeah. The only one with the clearest, really, the clearest objective is the vampire.
Yeah.
Because we kind of already have a lot of background text on how vampires act and why they act.
I guess Porkovich, in a way, is inspired by Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, I mean, I would think so.
Yeah, that connection seems pretty clear.
Dr. Porkovich kind of reminds me of I don't remember his name, but there's a local cultural icon here in Argentina he owns one of the largest butcher chains. Brands.
Oh, the King of Meat.
The King of Meat.
He's called the King of Meat.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, that is what they call him. That is kind of his marketing slogan.
He's in prison now.
He is in prison now, yes.
Very recently.
The King of Meat is in jail. Wow.
Is in jail, yes. And I forget what his name is.
Oh, man, I'm going to Google it.
But he kind of looks a lot like Dr. Porkovich.
Do you think this is what Porko was trying to tell us?
Maybe.
Do you think that he knew about this? And perhaps this is why he left... Argentina. Did he get too close to the King of Meat?
I would be.
I don't know. I might be reading far too much into this, but this is such a juicy detail. I can't let it go.
Alberto Samid,
yes, that's true. He's also very famous for beating up, I think, a reporter on during a live television show.
Yes.
For getting into a fight with a reporter.
And he fled Argentina briefly when the law was looking for him.
Why are they looking for him? I just saw that they were looking for him. I said, of course, but I never
knew this.
Dug into why. And obviously, King of Meat sounds a bit different in Spanish. It's not quite as.
It's more friendly sounding.
Yeah, it is a little more friendly.
I want to read all about this King of Meat. I want to learn all the details. But later.
We will send you a link, as many links as necessary, and we will definitely show you that clip.
Oh, tax fraud.
Tax fraud. Okay, that makes sense. It's more boring than Porkovich's thing, but
I found an oddly translated news article that says, in one document, Interpol identified the King of Meat as violent, and then a quote from Interpol says, Although it is an elderly person, it must be borne in mind that he has publicly expressed and externalized his opposition to comply with the orders of the public authority.
Oh shit. That is...
This guy is bad news.
Well, he's in jail now.
I mean, a king of meat was never going to be good news, right?
Yeah, the moment you start calling yourself the king of something, so base and bloody like meat, imagine the king of toilets. That person wouldn't be very pleasant either.
I guess. I mean, toilets serve a very basic and necessary function of society, while meat on the other hand...
No, that's true.
Maybe not. I don't
know what a better comparison would be.
Yeah. I think
probably the king of booze might be bad news as well.
Yeah, or the king of sewage, perhaps.
Yeah.
But he does look a lot like Samid, the white hair.
Yeah, he looks a little bit like Midnight Snack Porko.
So I wonder if there's a commentary there.
Maybe.
Going again to the kind of the vegetarian angle.
That's true. It's super weird that if Porko was a vegetarian, he called it Porkovich when he was talking about the meat industry.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
It is a short... It started out as a short jam game, so we can't always assume Porko meant every ounce of meaning that comes out of the game.
Unless it is a self-criticism, We do believe that Porko didn't remain a vegetarian.
Yes.
So maybe it is some kind of regret or self-criticism there.
Even when he became a vegetarian, he could have guilt about his previous eating habits.
Have you explored the relationship between his name and his vegetarian status? Being a man called Porko who might not have eaten any pork at some point.
So we did, when we talked about Chancho Quest, which is one of his first games, Chancho Quest is about being a pig that is going to be taken to the slaughter.
Yes, and Chancho Quest just means pig quest.
Yeah, pig quest. And it is very much from the internal perspective of the pig. It's kind of a very short IF piece. We believe that originally he had published it under the name Porko to kind of give the idea that the author was the pig, Porko, or to associate himself with the protagonist of the story. But it kind of just stuck from there, and he kept using it for his other games as well.
Interesting.
I mean, at least in Spanish, Porko reminds me of puerco, which is just a synonym for pig.
Yeah.
I don't know if it had anything to do with self-image concerns of Porko in high school.
Oh, maybe. I've never seen a picture of him, so I guess I'd have to look at his Mortal Kombat game to see what he looked like.
Maybe he just looks like a super normal kid, so that doesn't affect the self-image though.
Yeah, no, but I mean, there's a lot of things we associate negatively with pigs, so it could come from a whole bunch of things.
Yeah. And Porkovich is kind of a super big caricature of the knife and fork on hand.
Yeah, it is kind of this depiction of gluttony, and it's definitely not. It's not saying anything particularly positive about body images. Mm-hmm. It's very fat phobic as a caricature.
Yeah, I wonder what's going on with Bloodbite then. We've discussed Outer Fish and Porkovich, but Bloodbite to me just seems to be just a regular vampire.
Yeah, at least in the README TXT, the place where a developed bio should be just says he's a regular vampire. I don't remember if the game has any particular narrative branches that develop his story more. Yeah, he seems to, I think, be the slimmest of the characters. I mean, in the README, they just say as every vampire, he needs human blood to live. And I don't quite recall what his transformation feeding animation looks like, but I'm sure it's just a more scarier vampire.
Looking at the image, so at the few images we have of the game, he does look like, very pale. He kind of has that widow's peak haircut. He's got a big cape and a collar, all decked out in red. However, in the cover of the game, he is wearing a chef's hat, which none of the other characters are.
Oh.
So
that's true.
Go ahead.
On the cover, there's the vampire with a chef's hat. Outer Fish has a
bib on.
Oh yeah.
And Porkovich has the knife and fork.
Yeah.
Fork and knife. They're all ready.
I was gonna say he's a very stylish vampire, and he knows it. Look at that pose.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's looking at you like you know what you're in for. We're gonna have a midnight snack.
Maybe he was from the development team. He was the one with the highest self-image, and he just said, I want to be a cool vampire.
Yeah.
Well, Porko explored his inner demons more, and Pixelfish went a more Lovecraftian route.
Yeah, kind of explored these themes of alienation and otherness.
I don't really know how much input did the musician and the coder have on their avatars?
Well, it does say in the credits, I mean, in the README, that they all did game design, so they must have had some input there.
Yeah.
I do wonder if the chef hat does imply that the vampire character, that Bloodbite, had more of a mastermind role, and maybe that's why he's more distant or less present. I know that Bloodbite has some different dialogue or some different reactions from the townsfolk, but I don't remember any that are particularly that jump out to me right now.
Maybe because he starts out looking like a regular vampire, you kind of pay less attention to him. I don't remember having played much of the game with Bloodbite, but I do remember playing it with Porkovich and Outerfish.
Right.
Yeah, same.
I wonder if I can get this game up right now.
The thing about the game, or at least the jam build, is it runs very slowly, and I don't know if that's a stylistic choice or it's just what happens with all games.
So I tried to run this game and Windows popped out a message that Windows protected your PC.
I usually think that whatever malware it has to have been accounted for in dozens of Windows updates. So we're now slowly playing the game.
So there is this thing that Bloodbite has, which I'm looking at, which is a part that he seems to be wailing a lot. There is like, when he moves his hands, there's kind of darkness and trails of darkness that kind of move with him. But no, it's running too slow for me to get anywhere interesting.
It is incredibly slow.
He does seem to be the less monstrous looking character. It seems, very much like other stereotypical vampires, to kind of be hiding his monstrous nature behind some glamour, or at least some elegance.
He kind of looks more human than the villagers.
Yeah, that's also true.
He's more realistically proportioned. Thank you, Laura, so much for speaking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And for going back to this strange, weird game that we kind of reminded you of.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you all around. It was great.
I'm glad. That means a lot. And from Matajuegos and from En Busca de Porko, I think that is gonna be it for today.
Thank you so much for listening to all the new English-speaking audience.
All of you.
We'll see or hear each other on our next English language episode.
Which will be?
Sometime in the future.
Someday.
En Busca de Porko is a podcast by Matajuegos. Read us at mata.juegos with a J. Find us on Facebook and YouTube as Matajuegos, or on Twitter and Instagram as Matajueguitos with a GU. Do you have a question or experience you want to share? Write to us at matajueguitos@gmail.com or wherever you find us. Find Pablo on Twitter as PF Cuarta with a Q. Find my games at davidtmarchand.itch.io. Our guest today was Laura Michet. Find her at lauramichet.com. That's MICHET. The voice for the commercial break was Ali Smalley. This episode's music was White Rider by Ryan Ike from the Where the Water Tastes Like Wine soundtrack, but karaoke in Spanish by yours truly. Today's phrase from Midnight Snacks TXT. Arrow keys: run, jump, spacebar, attack, alt, brutal eating frenzy.